Our next speaker will further develop the concept of psychological flexibility, but bringing the results of different kind of data based on the web survey. He's same as Dr. Watts, part of the psychedelic research group at the Imperial College London. I'm pleased to welcome here James Close.
Thank you. To here. Lovely. Okay, everyone hear me all right? So yeah, I'm James. I'm working part of this group at Imperial College. I'm a therapist also based at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital in London, where I work with patients with chronic persistent pain, and here we employ this acceptance and commitment therapy model in treating these patients. And so my interest is in how this can be integrated in psychedelic therapy. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some other data that we have, which hopefully goes some way to supporting what Ros just spoke about, and what Jeff is going to speak about later as well, which is the integration of this model into our therapeutic outcomes. So if we look at existing theories around the psychological mechanisms in psychedelic therapy, there are numerous. There's this idea that there's a facilitated release of suppressed emotions, a cathartic release of that. And our colleague Leo Roseman is going to go into that in a little bit more detail next year. There's also this idea that there's a loosening of ego functions, the processing of subconscious emotional content as well. The breakdown of rigid thought patterns and rumination, enhanced sensitivity to one's environment, and connection to one's environment and those around them. And they help to mediate flexible coping strategies, potentially through this 5-HT2A receptor as well. And so what we're proposing here is that actually, while these are all correct, that maybe they can be integrated and embodied within this existing mainstream model of psychological flexibility, which is widespread practice all over the world for the treatment of depression and other problems as well. And perhaps this also can help us explain the broad-ranging effects of classic psychedelics, why they help people with lots of varying different mental health conditions as well. There's also some nice correlations here with the neuroimaging data that we have, which shows improved cognitive flexibility at a systems level when we put people in fMRI. So there's a nice metaphor there as well. So psychological flexibility, as we've said, it forms the basis of acceptance and commitment therapy. It's an integrated model of human behavior that's been around for quite some time and actually integrates various different theories around human behavior and how it changes in clinical conditions as well. And we know it's actually formed of these 6 separate aspects, which Ros has just gone through there briefly. So we wanted to measure this in a sample of people. We wanted to see how it changed following the psychedelic experience. And we did that using a web survey, quite a broad-ranging population, a big homogeneous group of people. And we measured psychological flexibility before and after their reported psychedelic experience. And that's what I'm going to show you today as well. So we hypothesized that, of course, psychological flexibility would improve after the psychedelic experience. We also hypothesized that these improvements would correlate with depressive symptoms. We know psychological flexibility has a good relationship with depressive symptomology, anxiety, and can predict therapeutic outcomes as well. So we wanted to support our hypothesis just to show that it wasn't a standalone outcome. And secondarily, we wanted to show that the respondents with depression saw greater relative changes in this psychometric measure than those without depression. And also, we wanted to explore how this concept of peak experience might influence flexible behavior, also referred to as mystical type experience. This is something that's been shown to predict clinical outcomes as well. Right. So how did we do this? We used 3 measures. We used the acceptance and action questionnaire, which Ros alluded to briefly there. This is a broadly used measure. It's well validated and well correlated with other measures for depression and clinical outcomes as well. What it actually measures is psychological rigidity. So what it measures is how is this idea of experiential avoidance and people moving away, and this sort of idea of closed behavior. And so higher scores represent people who are more rigid in their behavior. We've got our QIDS as well, which is, again, a well-validated measure of depression, depressive symptoms, and again, correlates well with other measures of depression, like the HAM-D and the PHQ-9. And lastly, the MEQ, Mystical Experience Questionnaire, which measures the extent to which the individual had a mystical or peak experience during their psychedelic experience as well. And so we did this using a web survey. This is the Psychedelic Survey. This was developed by 2 Danish designers. It's a fantastic tool. It's online, psychedelicsurvey.com. Anyone can participate. It's open. There are various different studies there at the moment, a ceremony study as well, and a microdosing study going on as well. And how this works is, this is sort of advertised online on various platforms, and individuals can register their interest to take part in the survey. They're given information, they give their email, they're told what's involved in taking part, they give informed consent, and then they also state the date at which they plan to have a psychedelic experience. And 1 week before that, they are sent a link to a barrage of questionnaires. In this case, we're interested in the depression questionnaire and the psychological flexibility questionnaire, as well as the mystical experiences. There are actually lots of other questionnaires that they were given. That data is going to be presented elsewhere later on, and David's going to go into that a little bit as well tomorrow. And so 1 day after their experience, they're sent another email asking them various questions and various measures about the nature of their psychedelic experience. 2 weeks later, we measure again the baseline data, and again at 1 month. Yeah. And that's what I'm going to show you here now. So the initial figures show significant changes after the reported psychedelic experience as well. That looks a little bit like this. Yeah. So we've got our measure of psychological flexibility or rigidity, higher scores representing higher levels of closed, rigid behavior. And we see a small significant drop following the psychedelic experience, which goes on to 1 month. Now, this is not surprising. This is quite a big, homogeneous group of people taking these psychedelics in various different settings. This is a mixed group, a non-clinical group as well. So it's not surprising that we don't see massive changes in that. So we were interested in the subgroup of respondents with depression. And when we look at their scores, we see a slightly different picture. We see, of course, higher levels of psychological rigidity at baseline, and we see greater relative reductions in that rigidity. So they're becoming more flexible, more open to experience when compared with the rest of the group who have generally a small drop, but potentially a clinically insignificant drop in rigidity as well. When we correlate these against each other, we have positive correlations at all 3 time points. So this is their psychological flexibility against their depression symptoms as well. Yeah. Again, which is not surprising. This is something that's observed time and time again, and forms the basis of the use of this today in mainstream therapy. This idea of peak experience, mystical experience as well. What we did is we did a cutoff on the questionnaire. So we chose those people who had a mystical peak experience, who had the larger intensity experience at the top, and we compared them to those people who didn't have a mystical experience, if you like. And in the same way that we see this MEQ able to predict as clinical outcomes, it also helps us to predict changes in psychological flexibility. So we see a drop in rigidity, a significant drop following the psychedelic experience as well. Good. So the implications of this, well, Ros has gone some way to speak about that in time. What we feel is there's a role for acceptance and commitment therapy, which is based on this model of psychological flexibility in psychedelic therapy. Can we use this model to help optimize and standardize the treatment that we're given? I don't think it's the only way to look at things, but I think it's a new and useful way to go about this as well. Again, coming back to this mystical experience, what role does this play in clinical outcomes? It has a role. We're not sure what it is yet. We need to look into this more. And again, we see greater relative changes in people with depression, suggesting a greater utility of psychedelics in a symptomatic clinical population, perhaps. Yeah. Of course, there are limitations. This is a big, homogeneous group of people. We can only go some way to account for the set and setting, which we know is very important, of course. Clinically meaningful change, we're not able to see when we look at this big group of people as well. It's self-reported. We don't necessarily know what dosage these individuals are taking during their psychedelic experience as well. And how sensitive is this measure? Well, actually, there are measures of these different aspects of psychological flexibility. So it would be really interesting to see what aspects change more than others. And of course, there's the ceiling effects. The very intention of taking some of these drugs implies a high level of openness to experience. So actually, we're going to see less changes in that group of people. So what happens when we have a clinical population and we measure this in them? Thank you. That's what I have to say.
Hey, thank you, James, for interesting talk. We have 5 more minutes, so there is some time for a few questions. You can ask either James Close or Rosalinda Potts as well. And there is the microphone on the left side, so whoever want to ask a question, just feel free to come here and do it. Yeah. I think we can invite you to the stage, both of you. Yeah. I hope so. Yeah.
Can everyone hear me? All right. My name is Albert. Thank you so much both for a great presentation. I have a question to you, Rosalinda, regarding the eventual biases, I guess, with the participants. I know that quote from one of the participants stating there was flooding through the rose, and it was a paraphrase from Aldous Huxley. So I guess it's a participant who knows his or her psychedelic literature, I guess.
Actually not.
No? Okay, that's fascinating. So did these participants volunteer, and have they had psychedelics experiences before? And if so, how would that affect the outcome, would you think?
I'm very glad you asked that, because I didn't really go too much into the details of the sample. So our sample of people had... can you hear that? Okay. They'd had depression for like 18 years. A couple of them had had previous psychedelic experiences, but they had both been so terrifying that they were the most anxious about doing it. They were absolutely not psychonauts in any way. The participant who said that about the rose was not familiar with Aldous Huxley at all. It's so interesting that some of these perennial themes just come out. They were mostly recruited from a database that we'd collected, but I really can't emphasize enough how they were people that were really at the end of the line, and that they weren't interested in the study because it was about psychedelics. It was because nothing else had worked. In our next study, we are going to balance some referrals from NHS GPs sources, and we'll take some from the database, but many from NHS referral sources, just to make sure we don't have that bias. But yeah, it's interesting. I didn't even know that was from Aldous Huxley, but yeah, it's. I think the experience with the rose is something that many people have, and we always have a rose in the room. So yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
I think we have time for one more short question.
Hopefully not.
Feel free.
Hello, thank you for great speeches. I'm wondering about if you've thought of comparing the psychedelic methods to other practices like meditation or group meditation, because I've seen similar effects like the one you describe from group therapy and other alternative therapy. So if you have something to say about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It's an observation that is quite fascinating. I think many experiences can bring about these same kind of things. Like, I think if you go into darkness for a long period of time, breath work, meditation, these kind of experiences can happen. I know that at Johns Hopkins, Matt Johnson was talking before, they did some work with experienced meditators and psilocybin. I think in terms of comparing the mechanisms, well, in a way, that is what ACT is trying to do, because ACT was developed by Steve Hayes many years ago, and he had, I think it was based around trying to encapsulate or operationalize the things that can happen in meditation, as well as lots of other things too, but that kind of psychological flexibility is, and the loosening of the default mode network control is something that meditation can do too. So
yeah, so mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is actually built into the model. It's there, yeah. So when I'm using this with patients, that we teach them mindfulness therapy, not in a group environment though. Actually, that's normally one-to-one, but that's an interesting thought, yeah.
And actually, in the next study, we're going to be doing breathing meditation quite a lot as part of the model. So, yeah, they work well together, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so we ran out of time. Thank you again to both of you, to Rosalinda Watts and James Close for the great presentations.